Now, if we're going to take it seriously, that we have a responsibility and a mission and a purpose to carry God's Word as it's expressed through the 12 steps to other alcoholics, then most assuredly that means that we need to have an intense and immediate interest on the new person, doesn't it? Somebody, after all, gave us a hand. So now we have to feel some confidence that we know what we're doing when we start talking to a new person. And that's why it's so important to read chapter 7 thoroughly and understand what it's saying. We've already learned that when we are working with somebody new, we're going to try to find out something about them, a little of their history. We're going to tell them about ourselves and how we drank. We're going to tell them how alcohol affected us, what it did to us. We're going to tell them about the terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. We're going to tell them about how we tried to stop and couldn't. We're going to tell them how alcohol literally brought us to our knees. Then we're going to tell them about the disease, and we're going to explain to them what's the matter with them if they are the same as we. If they're chronic alcoholic, they have a deadly, incurable, progressive illness. If they don't stop drinking, they're going to die. Clear as a bell, that's it. The problem that we've had, and we believe they have, if they're an alcoholic, they can't stop drinking. So you're caught in a vice. If you don't stop, you die. But you can't stop. How useless is it to say to a new person, don't drink? Why in the hell do you think they came to AA in the first place? They can't stop drinking. That's why they're with us. If they can stop on their own, they don't need to be with us. They can probably have some wonderful benefits from working the 12 steps, no question about that. But they don't need AA for that. The guy who can stop drinking, the girl who can stop drinking on his own or her own doesn't need us. Why in the world would you tell them stop drinking? And so once we've told them that they are victims of this disease, and if they don't stop, they're going to die, and they can't stop because they're powerless, then we need to then tell them how to get stopped, don't we? So then we tell them how we recovered. And the big book tells us what to do about that. Go to the bottom of page 92. Last line. Even though your protege, by the way, that's kind of an interesting term you can use for your sponsees. When I came in, we called them babies. And then some guys in Chicago started calling them pigeons. By the way, pigeon is not a pejorative term, you know. It means the next to carry the message. So we called them babies, and then they called them pigeons. And now we call them sponsees. When I first heard that word, I said, what in the hell is that? And now the fancy ones, the people with the spiritual ascendancy over most of us, call them sponsorees. I've got some sponsorees. You see the notches in my belt over here? Even though your protege may not have entirely admitted his condition, remember now this is all taking place at the first meeting, he has become very curious to know how you got well. Top of page 93. Let him ask that question, if you will. In other words, well, you know, you've just gotten to tell me that if I don't quit, I'm going to die, but that I can't quit on my own. Now, what do I do? How did you get sober? You say, boy, I'm sure glad you asked that question, because I'm about to tell you. Let him ask you that question, if you will. Tell him exactly what happened to you. In the foreword to the first edition, the word is precisely, to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this volume. Here the term is exactly. Now let's take that to heart. Let's think what that really means. Does that mean we're going to beat around the bush? Does that mean we're going to make up stuff? Or we're going to leave things out? Oh, for goodness sakes alive, you mustn't mention anything about God to this new person. They might turn right around and run out the door. How many times have you heard people say, well, when I come in here, if they had mentioned God to me, well, I just would have left. Balderdash. Total nonsense. How can you tell somebody exactly how you have recovered, assuming now that you work the steps, and not mention God? Can't be done. Not without lying about it. You leave God out of how you recovered, and you lied by omission big time. You're one of the great liars of that particular day. There isn't any way to leave God out. So what's the big book say? Tell him exactly what happened to you. Stress the spiritual feature freely. If the man be agnostic or atheist, make it emphatic he does not have to agree with your conception of God. He can choose any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to him. The main thing is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself, and that he live by spiritual principles. Now these are the things this is nothing new. We learned that all the way back in Bill's story. Remember, this is what Ebby said to Bill. And it's what turned Bill around. Bill was agnostic or worse. Ebby said, look, Bill, sure, I've got religion, because he had the Oxford group, which was a religious movement. He said, you can choose your own idea of God. You don't have to believe in my idea or the Oxford's idea or anybody else's. And the big book says no matter how weak that idea might be, it's the place we start. And later on, and especially today, it's become kind of cute to say, oh, you take an ashtray or a doorknob or something like that. Or even the AA group. I want to ask you, do you ever see anybody get down on their knees and pray to an AA group? Can you imagine what would happen in that room at that time? Well, it's you're my higher power. Please let me pray to you. Nobody would be foolish enough to do that, would they? And yet the whole big book and our plan of recovery and the steps requires prayer all the way through, doesn't it? Not only prayer, but meditation. Did you ever try to meditate to a doorknob? Just think about it. Everywhere in the big book that the term power greater than ourselves or higher power is mentioned, it's always capitalized. Why? Because that means a deity. So why would we try to hide that? We're not going to convince anybody to believe in God, but it's very clear that it is absolutely essential for us to tell the truth about how we recovered. The other idea that we found back in Bill's story is restated here. The main thing is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself. Everything starts from that point. And again, this is a willingness, and no, we're not telling them you got to believe, we're telling them you got to do whatever it takes to find the willingness to believe that there just might be a power out there greater than yourself. That's where it all starts. When dealing with such a person, you'd better use everyday language to describe spiritual principles. There's no use arousing a prejudice he may have against certain theological terms and conceptions by which he may already be confused. Don't raise such issues, no matter what your own convictions are. Quite obviously, this paragraph, though it doesn't come right out and say it, is admonishing us as sponsors not ever to indulge ourselves in evangelizing for any particular religion or religious concepts. We speak in general terms. It's a great temptation, and there are those in our fellowship who are so steeped in the necessity to constantly carry the particular message of their particular religious beliefs or their sect that this is something which they feel compelled to do. And every once in a while that might be effective for to get the right people listening to them. But it's very unlikely to be effective with most of the people who come in the door. Your prospect may belong to a religious denomination. His religious education and training may be far superior to yours. In that case, you're going to wonder how you can add anything to what he already knows. And boy, I'll tell you what, you'll run into that once in a while as a sponsor. Because many religions are based upon their concept of what is the end-all for all human problems, including, of course, alcoholism and drug addiction. That once having embraced their religious ideals and having become a member and done the catechism or done the confession or had the baptism or visited the old man on the mountaintop or learned how to wear a saffron robe and play the gongs and cymbals, whatever they happen to teach. But once having done that, everything is going to be just hunky-dory. And if you got problems like being a sinful drinker or a sinful drug user, those will all be taken away. And unfortunately, that doesn't work very well for most people. And yet, many folks are so imbued with the idea that that's true that you may have a little difficulty getting through to them. But that's okay, because we want them to see what we do and to want what we have and to be willing to follow what we've done in order to get what we have. But he'll be curious to learn why his own convictions have not worked and why yours seem to work so well. He may be an example of the truth that faith alone is insufficient. Faith without works is dead. That's lip service is paid to that as a principle, and I suppose it's paid, lip service paid to that in just about every religion. Faith without works is dead. In one form or another, that idea has pretty much universal application and acceptance, but did you stop to think what it means? Faith as a state of mind is therefore useless. Faith which is not exercised has no value. It's dead. And what is the work that is talked about here, especially in our 12 steps? Faith translated into the action of faith, or in other words, actively trusting our higher power. It's not enough to mouth the phrases, it's not enough to memorize the prayers. It's not enough to go through the rituals and tithe and do all the other things. What has to happen is that we have to get to a point where we exercise our faith in terms of our actions. And that's what we teach here in AA. And that's what the 12 steps are all about. To be vital, faith must be accompanied by self-sacrifice, and unselfish constructive action. In Bill's story, we heard and we read what Bill said, that if a man fails to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he cannot survive the certain low spots ahead, and he'll drink again. This is another way of saying the same thing. To be vital, faith must be accompanied by self-sacrifice and unselfish, constructive action. Let him see that you are not there to instruct him in religion. Admit he probably knows more about it than you do. But call to his attention the fact that however deep his faith and knowledge, he could not have applied it, or he would not drink. Notice the word applied. It means action. Putting the faith into action. Faith without works is dead. Perhaps your story will help him see where he has failed to practice the very precepts he knows so well. We represent no particular faith or denomination. We're dealing only with general principles common to most denominations. Now, as a sponsor, you're going to find that you must meet this situation often. But it's not that difficult if you know what you're doing. And here's the basic stuff. All religions that I know of, all ecclesiastical programs, all semi-religions, all sects, all have established certain basic principles which they believe in. And those basic principles have been around forever. And they're pretty much the same across the board. It's just that various religions apply them in different ways. Some religions have town meetings and nobody ever leads. And some religions have people at the top in a hierarchy that is untouchable and infallible. It doesn't matter in terms of the principles which are being espoused by the religion, they're all the same. And they're obviously true. This is what, intuitively at least, we've come to know that these things are true. But now what do you do about it? You go to church on Sunday, let's say, and the preacher gets up there and preaches a sermon, and you say, yeah, boy, that's right. That's the way I ought to be. And about an hour later, you're scratching your head and saying, yeah, but how do I get there? How do I be that? When you have the 12 steps, you don't have to wonder, do you? Because the 12 steps are these same spiritual principles restated as steps of action. Faith without works is dead. It is the action of faith that counts. And the 12 steps are exactly that. The 12 steps are faith in action. And these are the actions which we take to acquire and then to keep faith. And that's why they work. That's why they're so powerful. And that's why most religious leaders today are more and more coming to recognize that the 12 steps are critical in dealing with alcoholics and addicts, because they have to be taught how to put their faith into action every day in a practical way with discipline and consistency, and that's what the 12 steps do. So you see, when you're teaching the steps, you're teaching something of enormous importance. Probably the most important lessons that anybody can ever learn are contained in those 12 steps. And as a sponsor, you get the privilege of carrying that message. So you see, we're not putting notches in our belts. We're carrying a spiritual message to other human beings so that they too can recover. And we're doing God's work. And when we look at it that way, then we recognize that being a sponsor is a mission, it's a purpose in life. not a chore. It's a great opportunity. It's a great blessing. It's one of the greatest gifts that God gives us, is the ability to carry the message to other people. If we take it in that light, then it's never a burden. It's always a blessing. When somebody asks you to help them, you say, thank you, because you're being honored with their trust. And you're being given the opportunity to help somebody else, and at the same time to grow spiritually yourself. And without that, you couldn't buy what we have for $10 billion. That's the bottom line. That's why we're all here tonight. Top of page 94, please. We represent no particular faith or denomination. Now, as a sponsor, you need to be aware that some of the literature, other than the big book, does not necessarily follow that precept. So you got to be careful in dealing with your sponsees not to be inconsistent with them. For example, the idea of sin is not any part of AA. Though you do find mention of 12 deadly sins, or 7 deadly sins, or whatever they are. In other literature, you do not find that in the big book. We don't indulge ourselves in that kind of examination of ourselves, or, I mean, if that happens to be your particular religious belief, that's fine, but we don't teach it. We don't make those kinds of judgments. We're dealing with defects of character. We're dealing with actions we took which did not work, which were wrongful in the sense that they may have hurt others. We make amends in order to be freed from the guilt, remorse, and shame that arises from the fact that we may have hurt other people. We deal with defects of character and with guilt. We deal with resentment and dishonesty and selfishness and fear. We deal with the effects of fear acting upon our natural God-given instincts, which have warped and perverted those instincts so that they no longer work for us, they work against us. And as a result of the warping of these instincts, we're blocked off from God. So long as we're blocked from God, we cannot recover. The only hope that we or our sponsees have of recovery is to put God between us and the booze. And to do that, we have to be free of the things which block us. And that's why we work a 4th step and find out what those things are. And a 5th step to admit those things. And a 7th step to ask God to remove them. And a 9th step to be set free from our guilt. At that point, we enter the world of the Spirit and we become God conscious and we're restored to sanity. And we have fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. So anytime we dwell on the concept of sin, we're in a blind alley. Not only is it a blind alley, but it also happens to be inconsistent with the teachings of the big book. Furthermore, there is a prayer in other literature which has now become known in many meetings among many members of the fellowships as the 11th-step prayer. But that prayer is a sectarian prayer. And it speaks of an afterlife. Now, there are many who walk in the door who don't believe in an afterlife. For us to say to them, this is the AA 11-step prayer is just dead wrong. It's a nice prayer. Wonderful if anybody wants to use it. It's not the 11-step prayer. It can't be, because it's a sectarian prayer. So we have to be very careful that we stick to the letter of the big book, that we not in any way become inconsistent with what we're trying to teach. The same thing is true of that piece of nonsense we find in the back of the book called Appendix 2. Appendix 2 is a product of the atheists and agnostics who were members of the fellowship at the time the big book was written. And they tried to get that stuff into the original big book and were unable to do so. As a matter of compromise, it was eventually included in the second printing of the first edition as an appendix. It is not part of the big book. And one of the reasons that you have to be careful of that thing is that it is very confusing. Because the big book tells us that that Bill, for example, had a very sudden epiphany, a sudden spiritual experience, but that God comes to most men slowly. And this is repeated 4 more times in the big book. It's clear that anybody who reads the book is not going to be confused, thinking they have to have an epiphany in order to recover. There's no doubt that is not something that would ever confuse anybody who's been properly taught and who read the big book. Furthermore, that Appendix 2 puts God in quotation marks twice. God consciousness in quotation marks. It's kind of a ha ha ha. And then it says that our more religious members call it God consciousness. It's got absolutely nothing to do with religion. The big book on page 85 tells us that we all, to some extent, become God conscious. It has nothing to do with religion. I'm just pointing out to you that there are certain aspects of what passes for common knowledge around the rooms, which is in fact in direct contravention of the big book, and violates the principle that we are not a religion, nor do we teach any particular brand of religion, nor do we indulge in any particular teachings of any particular religion. So we need to be careful and not to confuse the people we're teaching. This does not mean that you individually in your own practice are not free to utilize whatever you believe, because certainly you are. But here in this workshop, we're trying to learn how to be effective sponsors and to carry the message of the steps to other alcoholics. That's our job. That's our mission. Now, the fourth thing that we're going to do with the newcomer is we're going to, on page 94, first full paragraph, outline the program of action. Explain how you made a self-appraisal, how you straightened out your past, and why you are now endeavoring to be helpful to him. It is important for him to realize that your attempt to pass this on to him plays a vital part in your own recovery. Actually, he may be helping you more than you're helping him. Make it plain he's under no obligation to you, that you hope only that he will try to help other alcoholics when he escapes his own difficulties. Suggest how important it is that he place the welfare of other people ahead of his own. How many of us actually do that? Might want to ask yourself that question. Make it clear that he is not under pressure, that he needn't see you again if he doesn't want to. Should not be offended if he wants to call it off, or he's helped you more than you've helped him. If your talk has been sane, quiet, and full of human understanding, you have perhaps made a friend. Maybe you've disturbed him about the question of alcoholism. This is all the good The more hopeless he feels, the better. He will be more likely to follow your suggestions. And that's all real good advice. And it's something to ponder and to think about and to read. You know, this big book is so dense that if you're not careful, you can go right by some of the most profound statements ever made. We don't think about it, carefully read what it says, parse the sentences, consider word for word and sentence by sentence what the big book is telling us. We're going to miss most of it. Your candidate may give reasons why he need not follow all the program. He may rebel at the thought of a drastic house cleaning which requires discussion with other people. Well, you got to know that that's not going to be all uncommon, but most of the time they won't tell you. They just drag their feet. They're scared to death. The AA program is not for sissies. Take courage. For many new people, the very idea of actually facing themselves honestly and thoroughly scares them to hell. And worse than that, to have to talk to somebody else about it and admit all this stuff. And then looking on down the line a little bit further, going out and making amends to the people that harmed. You got to remember, your newcomer has probably been running like hell from all this stuff most of their life. Geographic after geographic. Move to town, establish yourself as a good person, and then screw it up. And pretty soon you got everybody mad at you and chasing you around, so you leave town. Maybe even the sheriff's looking for you. Leave town. You go another place. Carry yourself with you. Repeats itself, only this time worse. As soon as it gets too bad, leave town. Never face problems. Never accept responsibility for our actions. And then we go to a treatment center and they tell us that's okay because you had a dysfunctional family. And your salt balance is off. And you're dual diagnosed and you're manic depressive. If you take all these pills, then you're going to be okay. You were abused, you were lied to, you were born the wrong color, you didn't have enough education, you were poor, you were too rich, you were spoiled, you were beaten. Everything becomes an excuse for crapped out behavior, and we love it. Whoever says to us, you're responsible, the big book does. It tells us that selfishness and self-centeredness, that's the root of our trouble. That we are the authors of our own misery, and that God didn't do it. You'll get sponsees all the time who will tell you that they hate God, because look what God has done to them. Or they don't believe in God anymore because how could He have let this happen? Then you find sponsees that say they hate themselves. Balderdash. They've been told that. They've been told they have to learn to love themselves. They've been told that they can't love anybody else until they can love themselves. And they hear stuff about going from the head to the heart. It's all a bunch of nonsense. You stop and think about it rationally and you realize that you can't love yourself because you're not two people. You can't hate yourself, you're not two people. Hate takes an object. Well, of course, there may be a few people who come in who are pretty much split personality, got 3 or 4 active personalities, then I suppose it's quite possible. But if you're fairly normal in that respect, it's utterly impossible to hate yourself. It's utterly impossible to resent yourself. It's utterly impossible to love yourself. What we can do, we can love the things we do. We can truly love the things we do. We can love the image and the definition of ourselves. We can love the way we are. When we begin to do what's right, to do the next right thing, when we begin to feel God's love for us, we have a strong feeling, a strong positive feeling. And that strong positive feeling has to do with what we do. Try to feel good and do the wrong thing. You'll find it's impossible. But when we do the right thing, we find that our feelings are strong and positive, and that they are optimistic, and that we have happiness. You want to know what loving yourself really means? The big book describes it as being happy, joyous, and free. What they don't tell you is that love is not a state of mind. Love is loving action. Without the action of love, love is just as dead as faith without works is dead. And we like to think in terms of our feelings being us, because that's what they teach us. Now you're going to get a lot of this stuff because it comes in the door every day, to every meeting. Somehow or another you have to learn how to deal with it. Frontal assault seldom works, but I'll tell you what does work. Prayer, meditation, the big book, the steps, learning the truth about what is wrong with us, watching that what is wrong with us be fixed with God's help, feeling the flow of God's Spirit into us, becoming God conscious, having a spiritual awakening. See, that's what we do about it. We don't try to talk anybody out of the stuff that they've been taught. For one thing, you're going to be violating a closely held principle of theirs, which is, I'm not responsible. How can I be responsible? Look at what's happened to me. It's just too hard to take responsibility for what's happened, to take responsibility for the results, the consequences of my actions. Please tell me that I'm not responsible. And we don't indulge in that. We say just the contrary. Yes, you are responsible. It does not mean you're bad. It does not mean you're evil. And when we do a fourth and fifth step, we're not doing anything to constitute an indictment. We're looking to find out what the hell didn't work. It doesn't work to play God. It doesn't work to spend every waking moment trying to fulfill my own wants, needs, and desires. It doesn't work to spend every waking hour when I'm not fulfilling my wants, needs, and desires to try to figure out why it is I'm not wrong and why they're wrong. To fill my time with hate and resentment and thoughts of revenge. To fill my time trying to figure out the next scheme for manipulation, how to survive. We want to take all that away from them, and they don't want to lose it. And we show them the fourth step and the fifth step and the ninth step, and they get scared. So now they're going to balk at this, and they probably tell us, I don't believe in that, or that doesn't look like it's necessary. more likely, because most of them are people pleasers, they're going to say, oh sure, of course, well I'll do that. And you're still hearing that same story 6 months later. That is, if you don't know what you're doing. See, you'll hear around the rooms that you must never tell somebody what to do. Balderdash. What does a teacher do? Here's the way you do it. I mean, you can take this or leave it. This is what I do, and this is what the people I know do who are crackerjack sponsors, and there are a bunch of them in this room right now. They all know that this is exactly what we need to do. I say to the new person, I'm going to tell you what to do, and you're going to do it. You're not going to drag your feet. You're not going to give me any excuses. And I promise you, though, that I'm going to show you every step of the way exactly what you're doing and why. And it'll all be right here in the book. And I'll promise you even further that if you do that, you're going to be just fine. I'll look you right in the eye and tell you that. If you do the work, and I'll teach you how to do it, you don't delay it, you don't drag your feet, you don't make excuses, just do it, I promise you, you'll be just fine. And I can do that because I know it's true. You see, the 12 steps never fail. Never. The 12 steps never fail. You and I have no power. All the power is in the steps. I haven't got time to fool with somebody who wants to screw around. And I won't. There are too many people who need help. Let me tell you something. The worst problem in AA and NA today is lack of good sponsors. By far the worst problem. There are people, hundreds, thousands of people every day being pushed in front of buses by crapped out, terrible advice from people who don't know what the hell they're doing. Pull out some kind of a Hazleton form and lay it on somebody and say, okay, fill that out and bring it to me when it's filled out. That's sponsorship. Did you ever see that questionnaire for the 4th step with 697 questions to be answered? Narrative form. You know what one of those questions is? Did anybody ever catch you masturbating? Can't you just imagine the gnome-like figure bent over a word processor typing all of these things out? Let's see what we got here. My God. Can you imagine? You see, so many sponsors belong to a group called the Half Measures Group. And they practice the easier, softer way. And the way you do that is you have all these forms. Fill out those forms. Just put check marks here. You don't have to write anything down. Just put a check mark. So what we do in here is we learn how to do a 4th step and a 5th step and 7th step and a 9th step in accordance with the directions in the big book. Now that's what never fails. This other stuff, forget it. If you do a lot of 12-step work or sponsorship, and have you ever tried to do a 5th step with somebody who's filled out a Hazleton form? Forget it. You see, so much of what we have out there that's cutting all these corners is not only wrong from the standpoint of being wrong in substance, but it's totally wrong in concept. They don't even understand, the people who wrote this stuff don't understand what the hell they're doing. They don't know what the steps are. They claim it comes out of the big book. That's a bunch of crap too. Anyway, there's I guess what I'm saying, there's an old-fashioned way that works, and everything else is very suspect. Why in the world, ask yourself this question, why in the world would you teach anybody to do something that you weren't sure would work, when you know that millions of people have already recovered doing what's in here? What more do we need to know? Just learn this stuff and do it and teach it, and that's all you got to do. And that's what we get to in this workshop. Okay, so your candidate may give reasons why he need not follow all the program. He may rebel at the thought of a drastic house cleaning, which, by the way, requires discussion with other people. Do not contradict such views. Tell him you once felt as he does, but you doubt whether you would have made much progress had you not taken action. On your first visit, tell him about the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. If he shows interest, lend him your copy of this book. So we're going to tell more about how we recovered, but we're also going to tell this person about the fellowship. We're going to give him some idea, some clues about what the fellowship is all about and what meetings are and the other things that we do here. Now then, let's see. I guess we'll probably start at the top of page 95 then next week. We're going to get into some really interesting stuff here about how you go about doing this.